The gunshot echoed across the valley as Violet Parker's husband fell dead at her feet, his blood seeping into the dusty streets of Concordia, Montana. It was 1878, and in that moment, everything she had built over 5 years of marriage crumbled like the dry earth beneath her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Thomas's limp body, the townspeople gathering around in a circle of shock and whispers. The bank robbery had gone wrong, and Thomas, simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, had paid with his life. 2 years later, Violet stood on the porch of her small homestead, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in hues of orange and purple. At 26, she was running the small ranch Thomas had left her, barely keeping afloat with the help of a few hired hands. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her once vibrant green eyes now dulled by grief and exhaustion. The ranch wasn't much a modest house, a barn and 40 acres of decent grazing land, but it was all she had left of her old life. "Miss Parker," called Elmer, her oldest ranch hand, interrupting her thoughts. "There's a man at the gate, says he's looking for work." Violet sighed. The last hired hand had left 2 weeks ago, leaving them short-handed for the upcoming cattle drive. "Send him up," she said reluctantly. She didn't like strangers, not anymore. Each new face brought uncertainty, risk. The man who approached was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His hat was pulled low, but she could see kind blue eyes beneath the brim. Dust covered his clothes from the trail, but there was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet gentle, that made her straighten her spine. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and revealing sandy blonde hair. "Name's Henry Young. Heard you might be in need of an extra hand." Violet assessed him with a critical eye. "Where you from, Mr. Young?" "Colorado originally. Been working ranches all over for the past 8 years. Last place was the Diamond B over in Idaho." "Why'd you leave?" A shadow crossed his face. "Owner's son took over." "We didn't see eye to eye on how to treat horses or men." She nodded, appreciating his honesty. "We don't have much to offer. $10 a month, room in the bunkhouse, 3 meals. Season's been hard." "That'll do just fine, madam. I run this ranch, Mr. Young. I make the decisions." "If that's a problem for you, the trail continues north." Henry's lips curved into a slight smile. "No problem at all. Worked for a widow in Wyoming once. Best boss I ever had." Violet didn't return the smile. "You start tomorrow at dawn. Elmer will show you where to put your things." As Henry walked away, she couldn't help but notice the easy grace in his movements, the quiet strength. Something about him unsettled her, like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. She pushed the feeling away. There was no room in her life for such thoughts. Not anymore. The next morning, Violet rose before the sun, as was her habit. She dressed quickly in her practical skirt and blouse, pinning her hair up neatly before heading out to start the day's work. The ranch never slept, and neither did its responsibilities. In the dim pre-dawn light, she was surprised to see a figure already at the corral, working with the newest addition to their stock, a spirited black mare that had thrown 2 ranch hands already. Henry stood in the center of the corral, speaking in low, soothing tones to the nervous horse. He held out his hand, palm flat, letting the mare sniff it cautiously. There was no rope, no restraint, just patience and gentle words. "She needs to trust, not be broken," he said, sensing Violet's presence without turning. "Someone tried to break her spirit, made her afraid." Violet leaned against the fence post. Some would say a scared horse is dangerous. Some would be wrong. Now he did look at her, his eyes serious in the growing light. "Fear doesn't make anything better, just makes the hurt go deeper." His words struck too close to home, and Violet felt her walls rise higher. The cattle in the south pasture need to be moved today. Elmer will show you which ones. Henry nodded, giving the mare one final gentle stroke before exiting the corral. Yes, madam, but I'll be back for this one. She's got heart. Throughout the day, Violet found herself watching the new hand. Henry worked efficiently, showing a natural way with the cattle and horses alike. The other men seemed to respect him immediately, following his suggestions without the usual posturing that came when a new man joined their ranks. At supper, she sat at the head of the table in the main house, with Elmer and the three other hands now, including Henry, filling the remaining seats. The conversation flowed easily, with talk of cattle prices and the upcoming drive to Helena. Miss Parker runs a tight ship, Elmer told Henry, but fair. Won't find a better place between here and the Dakotas. Violet allowed herself a small smile at the compliment. Elmer had been with the ranch since before Thomas died, had helped her keep it going when everyone in town expected her to sell and move east to her sister in Boston. I can see that, Henry replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly across the table. Takes grit to make a go of it out here. Necessity makes us capable of many things, Mr. Young, she said evenly. After supper, as the men retreated to the bunkhouse, Violet found herself alone on the porch once more. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. She heard footsteps and turned to see Henry approaching, hat in hand. Excuse me, Miss Parker, wanted to ask about that black mare. I'd like to work with her specifically if you don't mind. You have other duties, Mr. Young. I understand. I do it in my own time, before dawn, after supper. Violet studied him. Why does that horse matter so much to you? Henry looked out at the night sky, thinking. Everyone deserves a chance to overcome their fears, he finally said, even horses. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Violet felt as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed barriers to the wounded heart beneath. It unsettled her. Do as you wish with your own time, Mr. Young, she said curtly, turning away. Good night. Good night, Miss Parker, he replied softly, and she could feel his gaze on her back as she retreated into the safety of her house. That night, for the first time in months, Violet dreamed not of Thomas's death, but of riding free across the open plains, the wind in her hair and laughter in her throat. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the phantom sensation of joy more painful than any nightmare. The days fell into a rhythm as May turned to June. Henry proved himself invaluable around the ranch, mending fences, doctoring sick calves, and somehow managing to gain the trust of the black mare, whom he had taken to calling midnight. One evening, Violet watched from a distance as he sat in the corral, his back against the post, just reading aloud from a dog-eared book of poetry. Midnight stood nearby, occasionally lowering her head to nuzzle his shoulder. Never seen anything like it, Elmer said, coming to stand beside Violet. That horse wouldn't let anyone within 10 feet of her when she came. Now look at her. He has a way, Violet admitted. With more than horses, Elmer observed with a sidelong glance. Men follow him natural-like. Even that hothead Jimmy listens when Henry speaks. Violet knew it was true. In just a month, Henry had become the unofficial foreman, though she had never bestowed the title. The men looked to him for guidance, and he gave it with humble confidence. We're lucky to have him, she said carefully. Luck had nothing to do with it, Elmer replied cryptically before walking away. The next day brought news that threatened everything. Sheriff Miller rode out from town, his face grim beneath his gray mustache. Miss Parker, he said, dismounting heavily, got some concerning news. The Blackwater gang's been seen in the territory. 3 ranches hit already. Violet's heart raced. The Blackwater gang was notorious ruthless outlaws who left nothing but death and destruction in their wake. How close? 20 miles east. Thompson's place got raided yesterday. Took his cattle, burned his barn. He's in the doctor's office with a bullet in his shoulder. She felt the blood drain from her face. Jacob Thompson's ranch was twice the size of hers with twice the men. What can we do? Be vigilant. I've telegraphed for help from the federal marshal, but it could be weeks. By now, the ranch hands had gathered, Henry among them, his face serious as he listened to the sheriff's warnings. After the sheriff left, Violet called everyone together. We need to prepare. Extra guards on the herd, round-the-clock watches. We're short-handed as it is, Jimmy pointed out, a worried frown on his young face. I know some men, Henry spoke up. Good men from my days in Wyoming. They're working a place about 2 days' ride from here. Might be able to help, at least until the marshal arrives. Violet hesitated. More strangers on her land, more unknown variables. But the alternative was worse. Go, she finally said. Bring back help if you can. Henry nodded, already heading toward the stables. I'll leave within the hour. As he prepared to ride out, Violet approached him with a small pouch of money. For expenses, she said, and be careful, Mr. Young. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her concern. I will, Miss Parker. Lock up the house at night and keep a rifle close. As she watched him ride away, Violet felt a strange hollowness in her chest, a sense of absence that unsettled her deeply. She had come to rely on Henry's steady presence more than she cared to admit. The 2 days of Henry's absence stretched interminably. Violet barely slept, taking turns on watch with the remaining men. On the third morning, with still no sign of Henry or his reinforcements, disaster struck. Violet was checking the eastern fence line when she heard gunshots from the direction of the main house. Heart pounding, she spurred her horse forward, racing across the pasture. Smoke rose in an ominous black column against the blue sky. As she crested the hill, her worst fears were confirmed. 5 riders were in the yard exchanging gunfire with her men who had taken cover where they could. The barn was already ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the dry timber. She recognized the leader of the attackers immediately from wanted posters, Samuel Reid, head of the Blackwater gang, a man with a reputation for particular cruelty. Without thinking, Violet drew the rifle from its scabbard and took aim, firing a warning shot that kicked up dirt near Reid's horse. The outlaws turned toward her, and Violet realized her mistake. She was exposed, alone, and now the focus of their attention. Reid grinned coldly and raised his pistol. The crack of a rifle came from behind her, and one of the outlaws tumbled from his saddle. More shots followed, and Violet turned to see Henry leading 6 riders at full gallop toward the ranch, guns blazing. The Blackwater gang, suddenly outnumbered, turned and fled, but not before Reid fixed Violet with a hate-filled stare that promised this wasn't over. Henry rode straight to her, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed, though her hands shook on the reins. "The men? Let's find out." Miraculously, none of her ranch hands had been killed, though Jimmy had taken a bullet to the arm and Elmer was sporting a bloody gash across his forehead. The barn was a total loss, but they had managed to get the horses out in time, including Midnight, who stood trembling but unharmed in the corral. As they tended to the wounded and assessed the damage, Henry introduced the men he'd brought, former soldiers and experienced ranch hands, all of them with steady eyes and capable hands. They set to work immediately, helping to secure the property and establish a perimeter. That evening, Violet found Henry alone by the remains of the barn, staring at the smoldering ruins. "You came back just in time," she said softly. He turned to her, his face solemn in the fading light. "I'm sorry it wasn't sooner. You couldn't have known." "Reid won't stop," Henry warned. This was just a taste. He'll be back with more men. Violet nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. I won't give up this ranch. It's all I have left. Henry studied her for a long moment. There's more to you than this land, Violet. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it affected her more than she wanted to admit. You don't know me, Mr. Young. I'd like to, he said simply. She turned away, unable to bear the gentleness in his eyes. We should check on the men. Over the next days, they transformed the ranch into a fortress. Henry's friends, led by a stoic man named Frank, who had served as a captain in the war, helped build defensive positions and established a rotation of guards that covered all approaches to the property. Violet worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up as she hauled wood and stacked sandbags. She noticed Henry watching her sometimes, his gaze a tangible thing that warmed her skin like sunshine. It scared her, that warmth. She had been cold for so long. One evening, as a summer storm approached, Henry found her in the stables, checking on Midnight, who had finally allowed Violet to touch her. She trusts you, Henry observed, leaning against the stall door. She's learning that not everyone will hurt her, Violet replied, stroking the mare's sleek neck. A valuable lesson, Henry said softly, for horses and people alike. Violet turned to face him. Why did you come here, Mr. Young, to my ranch specifically? Henry didn't answer immediately, seeming to weigh his words. I heard about a widow running a ranch alone. Heard she was stubborn as a mule and twice as determined. I was curious. And now I'm something else entirely, he admitted, his voice low. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a moment, the strong jaw, the kind eyes that saw too much. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from outside. They rushed from the stables to find Frank pointing at riders approaching in the distance. At least 15 of them, Frank reported grimly. Reed's making his move. Get everyone in position, Henry ordered, then turned to Violet. You should take cover in the house. This is my ranch, she said firmly. I'll defend it alongside everyone else. The admiration in his eyes was unmistakable. Never doubted it for a moment. As the outlaws approached, spreading out to surround the ranch, Violet felt a strange calm settle over her. They were outnumbered, but their defenses were strong, and every person there was fighting for something they believed in. The first shots came as thunder crashed overhead, the storm and the battle breaking simultaneously. Reed's men charged from multiple directions, but Henry had anticipated this. Crossfire from the defensive positions dropped several outlaws before they could reach the main yard. Violet fired steadily from her position at an upper window of the house, each shot deliberate and focused. She saw Henry moving between positions, directing men, firing with deadly accuracy when needed. There was something different about him in battle, a hardness that his usual gentleness concealed. The fight seemed to last for hours, though later Violet would learn it was less than 40 minutes. The turning point came when Reed himself was hit, a shot from Frank's rifle catching him in the shoulder. With their leader wounded, the remaining outlaws lost heart and retreated, carrying their injured with them. As silence fell across the ranch, broken only by the steady drumming of rain, Violet emerged from the house to assess the damage. One of Henry's friends had been killed and 2 others wounded. The cost had been high, but they had held their ground. She found Henry kneeling beside the body of his fallen friend, head bowed in the rain. Without thinking, she placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent comfort. He covered her hand with his own, a simple gesture that connected them in shared grief. The rain continued through the night as they tended to the wounded and buried the dead. Sheriff Miller arrived just before dawn with a small posse, having heard the gunfire from town. Too late to help with the fight, but in time to organize a pursuit of the fleeing gang. I'm staying here, Henry told the sheriff firmly. Miss Parker's ranch is still vulnerable. Violet, overhearing this, felt something unfurl in her chest, a small, fragile tendril of hope that she had thought long dead. Later that morning, as the men who weren't injured or on guard duty finally slept, Violet found herself alone with Henry on the porch. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Henry looked at her, his eyes tired but warm. "You don't need to thank me. This place is worth fighting for." "And is that why you stay? For the ranch?" The question cost her something to ask, a piece of the armor she had worn for so long. Henry turned fully toward her, his gaze steady. "You know it's not." Violet felt her heart quicken. "Henry," she said, using his given name for the first time. "I'm not. I can't." "You're afraid," he said gently, not a question but an understanding. "After losing your husband like that." She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Henry took a step closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I won't push, Violet, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to leave." "What if I can't ever be what you want?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "Then let me be gentle until you do," he said softly, the words an oath in the morning light. "Some things are worth waiting for." Tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry for years welled in her eyes. Henry reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and brushed a single tear from her cheek with his thumb. The simple touch broke something in her, a dam long held rigid, and she found herself leaning forward into his embrace. Henry's arms came around her carefully, holding her as if she were made of glass. Violet closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel protected rather than alone. The days that followed brought change to the ranch. The sheriff returned with news that Reed and 2 of his men had been captured trying to cross into Idaho territory. The immediate danger had passed, but the sense of vigilance remained. Many of the men Henry had brought decided to stay on, at least through the summer, helping to rebuild the barn and strengthen the ranch's security. Frank, who had proven himself both in battle and in the everyday work of the ranch, accepted Violet's offer to become the official foreman. Henry remained, too, though his role was less defined. He worked alongside the others during the day, but in the evenings, he often found himself on the porch with Violet, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing the silence as the sun set over the mountains. July brought scorching heat, and the annual cattle drive to Helena. Violet had never made the journey herself, always staying behind to manage the ranch while Thomas led the drive. This year, with Frank to oversee things at home, she decided to go. "Are you sure?" Henry asked as they prepared the herd. "It's hard country between here and Helena." "I need to see it through," she replied, adjusting her saddle. "These cattle represent our survival. I should be there when they're sold." He smiled, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. "Then I'll be right beside you." The drive was everything Violet had imagined and more exhausting, exhilarating, a test of endurance and will. Days spent in the saddle from dawn till dusk, nights around the campfire with songs and stories. Through it all, Henry was a constant presence, teaching her the tricks of the trail, supporting without overprotecting. On the third night, as they sat slightly apart from the others, Henry handed her a cup of coffee and settled beside her on a fallen log. "You're a natural at this," he said. "The men respect you." Violet smiled, cradling the hot cup between her hands. "I never thought I could do something like this. After Thomas died, I was just trying to survive each day. And now," she looked up at the vast canopy of stars, "now I'm starting to remember what it feels like to live." Henry's hand found hers in the darkness, a tentative touch that she could have easily withdrawn from. Instead, she turned her palm up, allowing their fingers to intertwine. "Tell me about him," Henry said softly. "Thomas." The request surprised her. Most men would avoid any mention of a predecessor, especially a husband still clearly mourned. But Henry wasn't most men. He was kind, she began hesitantly. Funny in a quiet way. He loved this land more than anything, said Montana spoke to his soul. He had good taste, Henry commented. In both land and women. Violet felt a blush warm her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid it. "He would have liked you," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "He always said character matters more than anything. Wise man." "It was so senseless," she continued, the words coming easier now. "He was just depositing our cattle money. Wrong place, wrong time. All those plans we had, gone in an instant." Henry's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "The plans might have changed, but you're still here, Violet. Still making a life. He'd be proud of that." They sat in companionable silence until the fire burned low and the other drovers began settling into their bedrolls. As they rose to do the same, Henry lifted their still joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you for telling me about him," he said. Violet nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for asking." The rest of the drive passed without major incident, and they reached Helena with all cattle accounted for. The prices were better than expected, and Violet found herself with enough money to not only see the ranch through winter, but make improvements they desperately needed. The night before they were to begin the journey home, Henry escorted her to a proper dinner in Helena's finest restaurant, a far cry from trail coffee and beans. Violet wore the one good dress she had packed, a deep blue that brought out the green in her eyes. Henry cleaned up remarkably well, his usually trail-dusty clothes exchanged for a proper suit that showed his broad shoulders to advantage. "To a successful drive," Henry proposed a toast, raising his glass. "And to good company," Violet added, surprising herself with her boldness. Henry's smile deepened. "The best company." As they ate, Violet found herself more relaxed than she had been in years, laughing at Henry's stories and sharing some of her own. There was something magical about being away from the ranch, as if the distance gave her permission to be someone new or perhaps to be herself again, the self she had locked away after Thomas died. After dinner, they walked through the streets of Helena, the summer evening pleasant and mild. Without planning it, they found themselves outside a small dance hall, the sound of fiddles and laughter spilling into the street. Henry glanced at her questioningly. "Would you like to go in?" Violet hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Thomas died. But tonight, with money in the bank and danger behind them, the music called to something long dormant in her spirit. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." Inside, the hall was warm with bodies and light, couples twirling across the floor as a small band played a lively reel. Henry led her to the edge of the dance floor, then turned to face her, one hand extended in invitation. "May I have this dance, Miss Parker?" The formality made her smile. "You may, Mr. Young." His hand at her waist was respectful, proper, but still sent a flutter through her stomach as he led her into the dance. Violet was rusty at first, her feet following patterns half remembered, but Henry was patient, guiding her without making her feel inept. As the music shifted to a slower waltz, he drew her slightly closer, still maintaining propriety but allowing a new intimacy in their dance. Violet looked up to find him watching her, his expression soft in the lamplight. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That you're the strongest person I've ever known," he answered without hesitation. "And the most beautiful." Violet felt her breath catch. "Henry, you don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know." They danced until the musicians took a break, then stepped outside for air, the night significantly cooler now. Violet shivered slightly, and Henry immediately removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," she said, pulling the jacket closer, surrounded by his scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "I haven't enjoyed myself like this in a very long time." "Neither have I," Henry admitted. "There's something special about you, Violet Parker. Something that makes a man want to be better than he is." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Without overthinking, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "You're already a good man, Henry Young." His eyes darkened at the touch of her lips, but he made no move to take more than she offered. Instead, he offered his arm. "Shall we head back? Early start tomorrow." The journey back to Concordia was more relaxed than the outbound drive, the cattle gone and their saddlebags heavy with payment. They arrived home to find the ranch running smoothly under Frank's capable management, the new barn already taking shape. As summer faded into fall, the relationship between Violet and Henry continued to evolve, slow but steady, like a river finding its natural course. They shared meals, conversations, quiet evenings on the porch. Occasionally, their hands would find each other, or Henry would brush a stray lock of hair from her face with tender care. He never pushed, never demanded, true to his promise of gentleness. One crisp September day, Henry announced he had a surprise. "Can you spare a few hours?" he asked over breakfast. Curious, Violet agreed, and soon they were riding out from the ranch, Violet on Midnight, who now trusted her completely, and Henry on his sturdy gelding. He led her to a high meadow she had never visited, though it was on her property. Wildflowers still bloomed here despite the advancing season, and a small stream cut through the grass, crystal clear and musical. "It's beautiful," Violet said, dismounting to walk among the flowers. "How did you find this place?" "Exploring," Henry replied, spreading a blanket he had brought in his saddlebag. "Thought you might like a picnic." They sat together on the blanket, sharing bread, cheese, and apples as clouds drifted lazily overhead. The peaceful setting and Henry's thoughtfulness touched Violet deeply. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked finally. "Being so patient with me." Henry considered her question seriously. "Because some things can't be rushed. Trust, healing." He paused, then added softly, "love." The word hung between them, honest and unadorned. "I'm afraid," Violet confessed. "Not just of losing someone again. I'm afraid I've forgotten how to love, how to be open to it." Henry reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You haven't forgotten, you just needed time." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see how you care for this land, for your people, how you fought for them. Love isn't just romance, Violet. It's commitment, sacrifice, showing up day after day." His eyes held hers. "And you do that better than anyone I know." Tears welled in her eyes at his words, at the profound understanding they conveyed. Without planning it, she leaned forward and kissed him, a tentative press of lips that grew more certain as Henry responded with gentle passion. When they finally parted, breathless, Violet rested her forehead against his. "I'm still scared," she whispered. "I know," Henry replied, cradling her face in his hands. "But we can be scared together. That's a lot less lonely than being scared alone." The kiss marked a turning point. Though Violet still had moments of doubt and fear, she no longer held Henry at arm's length. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, they grew closer, learning each other's stories, dreams, the small details that make up a life. Henry spoke of his childhood in Colorado, his years drifting from ranch to ranch, searching for something he couldn't name. Violet shared memories of her sister in Boston, her parents long gone, the journey west with Thomas when they were barely more than children themselves. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. That evening, as they sat before the fire in the main house, Henry took Violet's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled but continued seriously. "Winter's coming. I know it's traditional for ranch hands to move on, find other work for the season." Violet felt a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "Is that what you want, to move on?" "God, no," Henry said fervently. "I want the opposite. I want to stay, Violet. Not as a hand, not in the bunkhouse. I want to be here with you, if you'll have me." She looked at him, this man who had brought light back into her world with his patience and kindness. "Are you proposing, Henry Young?" "I suppose I am," he said, his smile tentative. "Not very eloquently." "I don't need eloquence," Violet replied softly. "Just honesty." "Then, honestly, I love you. I want to build a life with you, here on this land you fought so hard to keep. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to face whatever comes together." Violet felt tears spill onto her cheeks, but they were different from the tears she had shed in grief. These were tears of release, of joy, of a heart finally unthawing. "Yes," she said simply. "I want that too." Henry's face lit with such happiness that it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the restrained passion he had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, Violet looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for being gentle, until I remembered how." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Concordia, with Elmer giving the bride away and Frank serving as best man. The entire town turned out. Partly from curiosity, the widow Parker had been a subject of gossip for years, but mostly from genuine goodwill. As snow continued to fall outside, Violet and Henry exchanged vows before God and their community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the town matrons dab at their eyes. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. As they finally prepared to leave for home, their home now, the town doctor's wife approached Violet with a knowing smile. "It does my heart good to see you happy again, Mrs. Young," she said warmly. "Your first husband was a fine man, but he would want this for you." Violet smiled, knowing it was true. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds." The first months of marriage passed in a dream of contentment. Winter wrapped the ranch in isolation, but within their home, Violet and Henry created a world of warmth and love. He proved to be a considerate, passionate husband, still gentle but no longer hesitant now that she had given her heart fully to him. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. As the land renewed itself, Violet discovered her own renewal. She was expecting a child. When she told Henry, his joy was boundless. He lifted her in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down with sudden concern. "Is that safe? Should I not have done that?" Violet laughed, loving his instant protectiveness. "The baby and I are fine. We have months yet before he or she arrives." Henry placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "A family," he said wonderingly. "Our family." As her pregnancy progressed, Violet bloomed. The ranch prospered too, with Henry's management bringing innovations that increased their cattle production and improved their breeding stock. They hired more permanent hands, built a new corral system, and even added a small apple orchard that Violet had always wanted. Their son was born on a perfect October day, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the mountains. They named him Thomas Henry Young, honoring both the past and present. Holding him in her arms with Henry beside her, Violet felt a sense of completion, a circle that had been broken now made whole again. "He's perfect," Henry whispered, one finger caught in his son's tiny fist. "He is," Violet agreed. "And so is this, all of it." She looked up at her husband, this man who had patiently waited for her heart to heal enough to love again. "Thank you for finding me." Henry leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for being worth the wait." 5 years later, the young ranch was one of the most successful in Montana territory. Their herd had tripled, their reputation for quality cattle spreading as far as Chicago. The original homestead had expanded, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. Thomas had been joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years after his birth, and Violet was now carrying their third child. On the anniversary of their wedding, Henry took Violet back to the meadow where he had essentially proposed. Now it was a family picnic, with Thomas running after butterflies and Elizabeth toddling after her brother on unsteady legs. As they watched their children play, Henry slipped an arm around Violet's waist, his hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Violet leaned into his embrace, her heart full to bursting with the life they had built together. "Completely," she replied. "You gave me back something I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" She turned to face him, the love of years shining in her eyes. "Hope, the courage to love again, even knowing the risks." Henry cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "Some risks are worth taking." As their lips met in a kiss that still held all the wonder of their first, their children's laughter echoed across the meadow, a joyful soundtrack to a love that had grown from the gentlest of beginnings into something strong and enduring, like the mountains that sheltered their home. In Concordia, people still sometimes spoke of Violet Parker, the widow who had defied expectations by running her ranch alone after tragedy. But more often now, they spoke of the youngs Henry and Violet, and how their story had become one of the great romances of Montana territory, a testament to the healing power of patience and the courage it takes to love again after loss. And in the quiet moments when the children were asleep and the ranch settled for the night, Violet would often think back to that turning point, the words that had changed everything. "Then let me be gentle until you do." Henry had kept that promise, and in doing so, had taught her that the heart, like the land, could survive even the harshest winter to bloom again in spring.